Right now, millions of women were abused, raped during the final stages of World War II, and while the attitude among many survivors is, we don't talk about that, this woman who's about to share her story with you has found the courage to place her memories on record. She went from living under a Nazi regime to living under a communist regime to living as a second-class citizen, then creating a first-class life for herself in Canada. The author of We Don't Talk About That, Giselle Roeder. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Dahlia. And so nice to finally meet you.
Nice to finally meet you, too. We connected last year. At this time, I had to go for emergency surgery, so I was unable to meet you in person. We stayed in touch online.
That's right.
And now you're here. And one of the first things you say when you come in, it was a story that I wasn't even expecting to talk about with you, and you started sharing it with me, and I said, stop. Something like this has to be shared with everyone. So please tell me what you were saying.
Knowing that you are Jewish and I'm German, and there is a lot of bitterness between, the Jews and the Germans.
Not us.
No, not us.
Yes.
But, we are all world citizens, right? First, we are Canadians. And my mother was supposed to marry a Jewish man because her father promised her to him over a card game. But she fell in love with a blacksmith from the next village. And so there was a fallout with her parents. But she was stubborn and married that poor man instead of the rich one. Later, when we were evicted by the Russians, we had 10 minutes to get out. Actually, it was the Polish soldiers that made us leave. We walked by that villa where this man lived, and he was an officer in the German army, and he was let go after they started this Aryan research, right? And they found out that he had a grandmother who was Jewish. But see, the Jews have lived in Germany for hundreds of years, and they were just like everybody else. And nobody cared if you were this or that or the other. You were just the neighbor or whatever. And another story with your background is this little boy, Gerhard. His parents, his father was a professor at the Stettin, and he and his wife had to disappear. They were friends with an aunt of mine, aunt and uncle, and they had to disappear from Germany. And the Russians were only a few kilometers away, but it was still under the Germans. And they got the last ship out of the harbor in Stettin, but it wasn't allowed to bring kids. So they brought their son, Gerhard, to my aunt and uncle, and they hid him until the war was over and the Russians came. And when they also had to leave in 10 minutes, who would pack passports or birth certificates or something if you have 10 minutes to pack and get out on the road to nowhere? So they raised this boy because he never heard from his parents, and the ship that the parents were on was torpedoed and sank. So this poor guy was all alone, right? He was 9 years old. And I was 7 at the time, and I really liked him because he had all these Karl May books, Winnie too, and later I lived in Winnipeg. But I wanted to read all those books that he had, which are like the Hardy books.
Yes. Hardy Brothers.
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
That's boy books, right? There's a whole series, and Karl May wrote about the Indians, the natives in America, without ever having been over here. And this guy always read every book that came out. And I always thought, yeah, boys can do that. They can go over to America, because Gerhard told me, when I grow up, I'll go there. He never made it, but I did.
She's the author of We Don't Talk About That. Ironically, she's talking about that purposefully. I'm sure Giselle Roeder is with me. So I find it very fascinating that as a little girl, reading was such a big part of, I would imagine, your escape as you're escaping. And then you turn it into writing. And when you're writing down your memoir of the first 30 years of your life, just from one difficulty to another difficulty, how difficult is it reliving that when you're writing it, and then reliving that over and over again when you're talking about it and reading it?
I have nightmares. My husband sometimes has to wake me up because for 52 years or 51 years, I never talked about it. I had put it aside, back burner. Then 4 years ago, I had given a lecture to a Probus Club, which is an offspring of Rotary. I'm still Rotary. And after I was finished with my talk, it was so quiet that I thought I did say something wrong. And then all hell broke loose, so to speak. You have a book? You have a book? Then write one. No, I didn't have a book. And so they pushed. Several people kept pushing until after a month, my husband convinced me, yes, start writing it. We don't know what comes out of it, but write it down. But since then, I am reliving the whole thing. And as you said, you seem to be very sensitive to this. I am reliving it each time. And then I didn't talk about it for 50 years, but now I can stop talking about it. I like to talk about it, and I like people to learn, and especially with the view of the present world situation. Look at all these refugees. Look at what's going on in America, in USA.
I know you must be. Absolutely.
And now I can't get enough of history. I want to know more and more, because I was a kid during the Nazis, and I just learned to shut up because my father warned us, if you tell what you hear at home, they take me away, the Nazis. Take me away and you will never see me again. Now, I was in love with my father, and I wanted to marry him when I grew up. And so we learned as kids to not
You didn't
talk
even tell
about
your
it.
mom that you were going to escape, did you?
Oh, no, I couldn't, because she couldn't lie. Because the next day when I escaped in 1955 from East Germany, see, at 11, when I was 11, the Russians threw us out.
Mm-hmm.
And we were on the road to nowhere for 3 weeks. We didn't know where we would end up. Mm-hmm. We ended up in the part that later became East Germany. So my teenage years were spent in East Germany under that system. And Dahlia, it wasn't much different than the Nazis. The young pioneers and the Freie Deutsche Jugend, the free German youth, was equivalent to what we were under Hitler, the BMW and the Hitler youth. And so it was all the same, but worse.
I want to continue this conversation with Giselle Roeder. She wrote, "We don't talk about that," and she's talking about that now. She's talking about life as a German in East Germany, and living under Nazi occupation, living under the Russian regime, living as a second-class citizen, then changing her life, moving to Canada, living a first-class life. We're going to continue the conversation. What I want to find out is it's a new economy. It's a new world. Security is so much more at risk. And I would imagine somebody who had to live through war is so afraid of another one. So what is it like now living in this new world? We'll continue this conversation with Giselle next. Right now, I'm having a conversation with a woman who has endured regimes, communism, war, and she's been able to come out on the other side and give herself an incredible life, but not without constantly having to live, I guess, part of that life. Giselle Roeder's with me. She's the author of We Don't Talk About That. And now what I wonder is, in a world where we have a new economy, I was just talking with two of the biggest security professionals in the world. Bonnie Butlin was one. She was on my show the other day, and she was explaining in this new economy, people don't realize that Maslow's hierarchy of needs has changed, and security now is one of the biggest deals because we've fallen back. We don't have as much money. We don't have as much safety. And so that is one of the things, among everything else that we see happening in the world, that leads to possible things such as war. As someone who experienced war, who possibly has so many triggers regardless of what's happening now, knowing our current situation, how does it make you feel?
Well, don't ask about my feelings, because my feelings are running scared, and I have to really hold my horses. I have read a lot of Churchill's books, and there was one sentence that really got me, and that is, in order to understand what is happening now and in the future, we have to know the past. And I think more and more people, and it's no surprise to me that English history writers have reviews on my website, placed reviews on my website about my book. And it's especially Bob Pickles who said, if we don't understand this book should be read in schools. If it wouldn't be so horrible, you need to read it with a stiff drink beside you. It's not true. It's just 30 pages that are really, really terrible. But if you follow, you understand what happened then. And you will, if you compare that to what is happening now, to compare what led to Hitler's rise after World War I, you will understand what is happening in the US right now. And I'm probably not the first one that says those two men are so alike. And the situations are alike, even if they are different. But the situation, as you mentioned, the security, people are running scared. And this problem with the refugees in Europe, not just in one country, is a big problem because they don't speak the same language. See, we were evicted. I had to relearn twice, but it was always Germans evicted from one part of Germany going to the other side, and they didn't like them, right? They didn't like us because we were invading they had to share food and blah, 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 and their houses and so on. And then I escaped from East Germany and went to West Germany, and the same thing happened.
Did you have a different accent from East Germany that you brought so they would know that you were an East German?
Oh, they would know. They would know. It's not just the accent, it's your dressing, your clothing,
you don't have the money,
your hairdo, and your whole demeanor, because you were always scared.
Did you try to blend in and seem more like a West German?
Yeah, but you had to earn money first. And then in my case, you always felt like a second-class citizen, and I was abused, and I had an affair with my boss. And I didn't want to, but you would today probably call it rape, but in a nice way. I had no way out, right?
Yeah.
There was no way out. And because he tricked me at a conference to said hotel rooms, and I thought I had my own room, but I didn't. And well, I was a virgin. I was 24 years old. So when I tell the story in that book, people just shake their heads. And sometimes people look at me now and I feel naked, vulnerable, because I have told it all. And so it's the same thing.
Does that make you feel, when you feel naked and vulnerable, though, are you feeling a bit more empowered because you were the one who got to share that the way you wanted to?
Yeah, but see, if you look at the news today, there are women who tell their stories now, if it's the RCMP or if it's, and they have the same things. They get sexually abused or attacked or something by colleagues, and they are afraid to talk about it. And in my case, if you think of all the Russian rapes, I was always afraid that my mother would get a baby, but my aunt was pregnant with a Russian rape baby. And in my new book, Forget Me Not, there is one story about a Russian rape baby. So what I'm talking about in both books, we don't talk about that or Forget Me Not, which is mainly a Winnipeg book, is what's happening all around us. But people are afraid to talk. So your original question was how I feel about the present situation. And it's frightening. And I think if people put their head in the sand, that's not good. People should listen to the news. People should be educated. of what's going on. And they shouldn't just by feeling go for one side or the other side. They should study or read, learn about both sides politically.
And not just both sides, but looking at history to see where
history and compare and see where this new situation could lead us. And it's not just one country. Mm-hmm. Because look at the Russians. They are just across from Alaska. They can walk across into Alaska and walk all the way down the coast or to us, to Canada.
Gisèle Roeder has been sharing her story with us, something that a lot of people were taught not to talk about who came from Europe, who came from East Germany. Gisèle Roeder has been sharing her story. We don't talk about that, a story that people don't talk about, but she's decided to do so. How she went from living under a Nazi regime to living under a communist regime to living as a second-class citizen, then creating a first-class life here in Canada for herself. Needed a lot of strength for that, and it goes beyond the type of strength that you're taught, the type of strength that we typically hear of. And what is it that an emotionally strong person needs? Probably not the things that you think. So joining us to talk about the characteristics of emotionally strong people, we have our resident therapist from Bergen & Associates, Carolyn Clausen. Welcome.
Great to be here.
And it just so happened that we decided to keep Gisèle around because she's very integral to this conversation. She's an actual example of an emotionally strong person to be able to go through the life that she's gone through and then not only go through it, but then live it over and over again. So before we even talk about that, it was a reunion between you two.
Not really.
And you don't even know each other.
When you told me, that's right, when you told me that she was going to be on, I'm like, oh, I know her because when I was little, I watched her on TV, right? And I'm like, oh, I get to be in the same room. I was kind of tickled.
You still are. And even under such emotional circumstances, she touched you that much. Why? How?
Well, and there's ways in which her story and my grandparents and great-grandparents' story echo, where I am the grandchild of people who had to also escape from Russia through Germany or through South America. And so I hear the stories that she has lived. I've heard the stories about growing up. And so there's parallels to our stories, which is kind of cool then just to connect during the commercial.
Do you know what I'd like to, this would be very cool, because you have a list of these characteristics that emotionally strong people need, Carolyn. But I want to know, before you even tell us that list, Gisèle, what have you learned? What have you needed to be able to keep going? What has kept you strong? What do you think is important for emotionally strong people?
Well, I think I learned that as a child because my father was taken to Siberia in 1945 and my mother was 4 little kids. I was the oldest at 11 and the youngest was in a buggy. She was a baby. And because of that little one, my mother was not taken to Siberia because it was everybody 16 to 60, women and men. They were all taken away. And my mother had never worked because during those times, women were in the house, right? House and babies. And so she was totally lost without my father. And I had to learn at that time already because she always said, Gilla, what are we going to do? Gilla, what are we going to... That was my pet name, right? Gilla. What are we going to do? And when we were on the road to nowhere for 3 weeks next to the Russian war machinery and slept under the stars or under overhangs of buildings and were afraid to leave a spot if you had to go to the bathroom or something, because somebody else would take it. And because there were millions of people on the road, there's over 3 million people. And so it was always, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? What are we going to eat? How do we feed the baby? And a baby lived on burnt barley, coffee grounds, burnt barley ground, and with water very often just out of the ditch. And it was as thin as just bones and skin. And I was always the responsibility was on me to find something. And I don't know, God help me, I always did find something.
How did you stay strong as a kid?
Well, responsibility. I wanted
Purpose.
Purpose, yeah, purpose. And we didn't think about why and what. We thought of just living in that moment, and we just did what we needed to do in order to stay alive. And so you didn't question, why are the Russians next to us, or why did this or that happen? And then later, when luckily my father, as the only person from our whole village of 1,000 people, came back from Siberia, my mother didn't need me anymore. I was 14, and all of a sudden I had no purpose, and I wanted to kill myself. These stories are also in that book. And I felt totally lost without that responsibility, because I kept my little sisters alive and helped my mother, and I was the confidant, and when my father was back, I was a nobody. And then later, when I had to fight my way through the East German time because of father coming back from Siberia, I had learned Russian, and I was good at it. I could read the Karelian writing. I could read and write simple stories. But when my father came back, and the 6 of us slept in one little attic room, and my father would tell my mother overnight, when he thought we were all asleep, what he went through in Siberia, I started to hate the Russians. And I went from an A+ to a D in a very short time.
It's 2:39 at 680 CJOB. Giselle Roeder is talking about growing up under regimes and running and escaping. And this is very, it's very illustrative of what defines emotionally strong people. Everything that you're talking about there, I'm looking at the list of the characteristic traits of emotionally strong people, which Carolyn Clausen is here to talk about. So when you hear Giselle talking about these things, Carolyn, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking that Giselle is a very humble woman who sells herself short. She talks about how she functioned as an 11-year-old helping her mother because she had no choice. She did have a choice. She dug deep and she found ways to do that. And that wasn't easy, and not everybody would have been able to figure out how to get through such difficult situations. And I suspect that those very difficult years helped give her internal strength and helped her develop her emotional strength throughout her adulthood. But even there, she's telling us stories about the emotional strength that she had, which I'm kind of just sitting here in awe and admiration as she tells these stories.
So often when we talk about emotional strength, and Carolyn pointed this out to me too, but it's exactly what it is. We think of stoicism. Giselle Roeder's anything but stoic, and she's incredibly emotionally strong. So we'll talk about this more with Carolyn and Giselle straight ahead. The two people here with me right now hear that the clock is going to go ahead on Sunday, and smiles immediately on their faces. Despite everything she's been through, she still smiles because she's a strong person, and I think that's part of her emotional strength. The fact that she can still smile is what has gotten her here today. Giselle Roeder, who's been sharing her story of escape and survival and then creating a new life, but not forgetting her old one, and sharing that with us, and sharing that in her book. We Don't Talk About That. And our resident therapist, Carolyn Clausen from Bergen and Associates, is here to talk about the emotional strength and what creates emotional strong people, because typically, Carolyn, people think that it's stoicism, but it's other.
Well, often we define emotional strength as, if somebody hears some really bad news, how strong were they in that moment? How much emotional reserve did they show in that moment? And that demonstrates emotional strength. And what we're discovering very much in research is that it's not the immediate reaction. It's what happens over time when people experience setbacks and disappointments and tragedy. How are people able to absorb it, to make meaning of it, to find ways of turning it into something that can be redemptive and to rise up stronger, maybe even than they did before. And that's really the true measure of emotional strength.
Is Giselle textbook to you when we're talking about emotional strength?
Well, Giselle certainly has had some very difficult experiences. certainly early on in life, and then she was talking about throughout, and she was always found a way to sort of keep going and to find ways of making success. And one of the things that I noticed that she's done is she's really turned to writing, and she's allowed herself to explore her experience and to make meaning of it in a way that I think is helpful to her as she works to move forward, so that she can make sense of it, she can become even stronger as she explores it and writes about it. And it's kind of an irony of we don't talk about that, is the part what her book is titled, but she is talking about it. And that, I think, is one of the measures of emotional strength, is to deal with what's there rather than to push it away. And because often that which you resist persists, and that which you open up then doesn't control you in the same way, and you can get strength from that.
The trouble is, for 53 years, I didn't talk about it, or for 60 years, and now I can't shut up.
We laugh at it, but is that really why?
Well, I think it feels, we are storytellers, and we long to be known and have our story heard. And once people start writing, then often they can't stop because it is so good. And I think sometimes people feel like if I start writing about it, or if I start talking about it, I'm going to start crying and I'll never stop. And really what it does is the healing starts and doesn't stop.
Giselle, when you look back with the new perspective now of seeing your story in words and being able to write it and live it, what do you think has been the number one thing that has driven you, that has kept your emotions not just together, but has kept you pushing forward constantly?
The reaction of people. I get
connection, Carolyn. We're wired for connection.
The reaction of people, because the reviews I get from 90 countries now, all over the world, close to 7,000 people, according to WordPress at the end of last year, because of my website, right? The reactions I get is, thank you for writing this book. Now I'm interested to listen to my grandparents or to my parents. And you can't imagine, it makes my hair stand up. People that want to meet me, people who want to talk to me, people who write once or twice a week. I get emails from Afghanistan, from Honduras, from all kinds of places. Thank you for writing that book, because now I understand. Now I understand. Where was I? Did I not learn that in school? Why did my parents not talk about it? If I ask my grandparents, they say, oh, it's so long ago, I don't want to talk about it. But now I want to. And there is, hello to Audrey in Winnipeg. She said she'd never been interested in learning about her family history. Now there is still an aunt alive and an uncle, and she wants to have a family dinner, and now she wants to listen. And these kind of things, that keep me going. Because I want to share. I want to make people aware of what's going on. Listen to your own stories, because it will make you feel richer, not in money, but it feels richer, because education is something that is the foundation of everything. And so listen to your family stories. Write it down. Talk to them before they die, because this is the last generation that still knows.
Carolyn, when Giselle's talking about people reaching out to her, and that's been the thing that has kept her going. So her emotional strength has connected with people, and then it gives them emotional strength. So emotional strength is contagious.
Is something that is developed in community. We give it to each other. When we share our stories, we multiply the wisdom and the strength that we can all share together. It's a beautiful thing. It is wonderful to hear her passion about the value of sharing stories with each other.
And if people want to hear more passion, you are writing a sequel.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
19 chapters are done.
How many chapters are you hoping for here?
Oh, I don't know, but it's going to be as big as this book. This book is like my first 30 years. The next book is going to be 50 years, right? That's my Canadian life.
I can't even believe you're able to do the math up to 50 more years after that. I know that you're 82 now.
Yeah.